The play on the field, the courts, and the ice is just one part of sports. Behind every game are the people hard at work so we can enjoy the action. They're the owners, administrators, agents, broadcasters, and promoters who bring the games to life. Meet them when you go behind the game with Patrick Klinger and Bill Robertson. Welcome to Behind the Game, presented by Lexus of Wayzata and Lexus of Maplewood. I'm Patrick Klinger, president of Agile Marketing Partners. Alongside me, a man who just signed a major NIL deal with the Clapper, Bill Robertson.
They still make the Clapper. I love it. Good afternoon, Patrick. Great to see you.
Good to see you, Billy.
For all our viewers out there, our guest on Behind the Game today is really going to be interesting because this is an area where a lot of fans, media, sponsors really don't know what it's all about. And we're going to hear from Derek Burns and Robert Gag, who are co-founders of Dinkytown Athletes. Dinkytown Athletes, in a nutshell, is the name, image, and likeness collective designed to connect University of Minnesota student athletes with their local businesses and fan base. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Good to have you here.
It's great to have you here. This will be an interesting topic, and we got many questions, and I'm sure we could go on for hours today, but I'll start with the first question. Name, image, and likeness. People don't fully understand it and how it works. In its most basic way, tell us what it is and how is it changing the face of college athletics?
Well, how it is a shorter answer. How it's changing college athletics is a longer one. But essentially, a little over a year ago in July, the Supreme Court ruled that college athletes could benefit and be compensated for their name, image, and likeness. And that was a big change because previously college athletes were limited to a scholarship and a stipend. And so that really opened the door for these athletes to partner with, as you mentioned, businesses, fans, et cetera, to be able to monetize and be compensated for things, their brand essentially, their name, image, and likeness individually.
Gents, you've both been successful in business. You've been in business together. But what drove you to create a collective for the University of Minnesota?
I actually think you should answer this
Okay.
one, Derek.
Well,
definitely.
It's our passion for the University of Minnesota athletics. I was a scholarship athlete at the university a number of years ago. Rob is part of a family of multi-generational Gopher fans. So our passion to help the university and support the student athletes that are there, because ultimately, and I know we'll get into it, this is becoming a competitive space for colleges to compete. So it's going to be, it already is essential, it's necessary, and so we wanted to do our part to try and support and move this forward.
Robert, what is the relationship between Dinkytown Athletes and the University of Minnesota, whether it's the administration or the athletic department? Are you affiliated, or do you operate completely independent from all of that? And
I mean, great question. I mean, it is independent, and that's just the way it needs to be. I mean, we are working closely with them because it's really important in the landscape of college sports to have a collective that are supporting those athletes. So in the best, most compliant way possible, we have a great relationship with the U, but we are definitely separate organizations.
Let me follow up with that. The word collective is somewhat new in this space. Mm-hmm. How did that come about, the word collective? Do we know?
Well, it's a collection of it's basically another word for community support. It's a collection of fans, boosters, businesses that want to support the university and their athletes.
So maybe if you can expound on that a little bit, how does the money flows into the collective and then it flows out to the student athletes? And my understanding is there really isn't a profit margin for you in this either.
Right.
No, I mean, I would say, I mean, Derek gave a really good answer on why us and why we got involved, but someone needed to step up, and that ended up being us. And when you look at this, like, it's a passion for us. We want the Gophers to be the very best, and to do this, you have to really have the philosophy of those dollars need to go to those athletes. So we've worked extremely hard to make sure that our operational expenses are as minimal as possible, so that every dollar in, whether we receive that from a donor, from our membership, there's different membership levels, and then finally business partnerships. When that revenue goes, we want to make sure that as much as possible goes to those athletes.
I think for our viewers too, I want to make it clear that it isn't just football and basketball where you get all the media attention, but it goes for both men's and women's sports at the University of Minnesota. So can you talk a little bit about how that works?
Well, it's certainly our commitment is to have an organization that is set up to be able to support all sports and all student athletes. So, and I think there are surprises in there too, because yes, football and men's basketball are the most visible sports, but when you talk about the value, the NIL value of these individual athletes, you might be surprised that there are a number that are not on those two sports teams that have a very high value that's mainly tied to their social media following and influence. But no, we're set up to support all of the teams and athletes, and we've been pleasantly surprised too by the interest in multiple sports and athletes.
Our current mix of athletes, I believe it's right around 50-50 at this point.
Yeah, it's great.
You know, for years, universities have been engaged in an arms race of sorts on athletic facilities, designed to try to draw recruits. Now, with NIL's emergence, has that really become more important than athletic facilities in terms of bringing student athletes into a particular university?
Well, it's certainly the hot new item, and there's no doubt. It is a new battleground, and I think it's fair to say that it will be a pillar by which the universities and their athletic departments are evaluated, along with things like facilities and academics and geography and things like that. So is it the most important? That's hard to say. It's hard to get tangible evidence around this, but certainly it has become essential. You know, all Power 5 universities for sure need to have a collective and need to have an NIL program attached to them to be able to offer competitively. I don't know, would you say it's the most important?
I wouldn't say it's, I mean, it's what people are talking about.
Right.
But it's still in its infancy. So how it all plays out over time, I mean, I would just say what has happened now is maybe the arms race as far as facilities might not be as important as it was just 2 years ago. I mean, that was the most important thing, you know, the glitzy locker rooms, and it might come down to just the opportunities or to find an environment like the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, which is great for marketing. The companies have a lot of interest in our student athletes, and that's been a real exciting thing that we've seen, and that could separate us from a lot of the other competitors that we have.
And if I may follow up on that, do you find yourself in competition at all with the university athletic department? Because they're out certainly trying to get donors to continue to fund the athletic facilities. At the same time, you're approaching, I assume, those same donors to fund NIL opportunities.
Well, it's interesting. We didn't know when we started this how much of an issue that would or wouldn't be, and we've been pleasantly surprised by a few things. Number one, the university athletic department themselves, although we're a completely separate entity, they are all in on this, and they're all supportive. If you think about it, they want their student athletes to have every possibility. They want them to be able to benefit from all possibilities. So they've been fully behind this. We've worked with compliance, and they've been. I'm just happy to say that the university has not dragged their feet on any of this in a compliant way. They're there. They want it to happen. So, no, it's not really been a competitive. Ultimately, you're right that some of the same fans and boosters, et cetera, will support. But I think there's a case to be made that if you're able to be successful in this world of NIL, that is going to raise the visibility, the exposure, and maybe ultimately the success of the programs themselves, which then in turn is going to benefit the university and their normal giving funds, et cetera, and it's going to be maximized for everybody.
I would say when you talk competition, the other thing that's unique in our situation is that the University of Minnesota is situated in a a really competitive marketplace with all the sports. I mean, a lot of the sports that you guys have been involved with throughout the years, and that might be the biggest challenge that we have, or the biggest competition is just, there are agencies looking for placement for, Vikings and Timberwolves and you name it, and we're going after the same companies that they are. So, when we look at it, there's definitely a lot of competition for the dollars, but the U of M, we're really in alignment.
There's a lot of media reports, and we talked about this prior to the show, exaggerating what a quarterback at a SEC school or a Pac-12 school or a Big Ten school would be making. Talk about that a little bit, because if it is exaggerated, I want our audience to understand that not all these athletes are making millions of dollars, and quite frankly, they're probably not making much, but enough to help them through school. But maybe explain that to the audience.
Thanks for asking, 'cause it's a good opportunity to explain. Yes, what's making the headlines now are the 6-figure, 7-figure supposedly deal that an athlete, a high-profile athlete, is making. I mean, what we've found, point blank, is that maybe the top 4% of profile athletes are garnering some bigger deals, and 96% of what's going on is not representative of those deals. So although that does exist and it is happening to some degree, 96% of what's going on in NIL is not only smaller scale, but is more tied to the athlete being able to earn things. It's not a pay-for-play situation which is not compliant, by the way, to have an athlete just be compensated for attending a university. That's the way it's being reported. It makes for a good story, and I'm not saying it isn't going on, but it's really not representative of the true story of what's going on with NIL.
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of games. I mean, like you look at last summer and a lot of the conversations we would have with people, they'd reference Saban from Alabama and how, he feels that there need to be guardrails, and how, he was doing this woe is me and, with NIL. Meanwhile, what he was doing is prompting his own base to give him bigger checks. Right. But the news out there is when Saban says anything, then it's the God or it's law, and he's just playing it like he has done for years. So there's a lot of media hype in this, and we find out more and more of the truth every single day that we continue to grind, making sure that we take care of our student athletes.
Speaking of Saban, in many markets across the country, like Alabama, college sports dominate. In Minnesota, that's not the case. We've got every major professional sports team here. Those teams generally grab the headlines. So in a market like the Twin Cities, where sometimes the University of Minnesota doesn't get the same level of exposure that maybe they would in a program would in other markets, can you be successful with NIL here?
Well, for the first time ever under NCAA rules, athletes are able to market and promote and be a part of that raising of the exposure and visibility of themselves, and by arm's length, the programs themselves. So that is something that competitively has not been there before. But ultimately, everything you said is true. This is, in my opinion, the most competitive sports entertainment market per capita in the country. There isn't another, for this population size, another market that has this many sports entertainment options for fans. But ultimately, the market size is where the potential is. I mean, if you also compare Minneapolis-St. Paul and the Gopher sports market in size and reach for potentially these NIL deals or the exposure that the athlete could get, it's way, way bigger than somewhere like Lincoln, Nebraska, which is, the 107th largest media market in the country, where Minneapolis-St. Paul is the 14th, 15th largest media market. So the potential is it's the sleeping giant that people talk about as potential for, in this case, Gopher athletics.
I think the only other thing I would say, Derek, to that, to add to the question would be, is the geographic of the demographics, I should say, of the athletes. That it's casting to a younger audience, and there are certain marketers that they want that younger base of whether that athlete can support what they're selling, but the marketers, they want that young age group demographic, and that's what our athletes are able to bring.
Well, and speaking of age, one of the questions I have in working in the United States Hockey League is this is now filtering down to boys and girls, young men, young women in high school, and maybe even as early as 12, 13 years old, looking at these opportunities. Is this going to change the dynamic, or how does this all fit in with what you're doing?
We're not involved at all in recruiting. So we're taking a very above board compliant approach. We're proud of that. So we are not involved in speaking to, working with, negotiating with high school recruits or any recruits, period. But just a general answer to your question about is NIL going to become an influence or a factor for younger than college age kids? Absolutely. I don't think it's unprecedented. I mean, you look at the gaming world and the streaming world, there are teens and preteens earning lots and lots of money because they're a famous gamer, they're a famous YouTube streamer. So it's not unprecedented. I think we're just going to see more of that potentially. But like Rob said, it's in its infancy, so we'll see where it goes.
You mentioned social media earlier. Does NIL really force athletes to have to build a brand and gain followers in order to get NIL opportunities? And can that potentially distract student athletes from their studies and from the sport that they're at the university to play?
Well, I think when you look at it, first of all, that if they're going to that next level in life, whether it to be in the pros where they're going to need to build their brand, or if they're just going to go and work at General Mills, it's important to build your brand. And this gets the people opportunity. I think we were in a meeting today where it allows the student athletes to be professional before they're professional, whether that's whether that's on the field, the court, or in the boardroom. And I think that's what we hit on. It's really important, and you can see the student athletes can do it better than others. Helping each other out by retweeting or liking and forwarding. I mean, they can help each other build the brand. It's just going to be important that they're cognizant of it, and it's for their future.
From a compliance perspective, where is the NCAA in all this, or are they out on their own island trying to figure it out as well? Because when it first started, they kind of took a hands-off approach, and each state was run differently, and you have all those, but maybe you could talk to that.
It's confusing. The NCAA has done a good job of laying out rules and guidelines, and they've added to them, and they've added clarifications. There is still a state component because NIL is tied to compensation, so at this point, on a federal level, there's not been as much regulation or guidance, so the states have stepped in. But where is the NCAA on this? Well, they've laid out guidelines and clarifications, but they've been pretty hands-off with enforcing. And really, if I'm being honest, there's an antitrust component to that I think they have to be very careful with. If you take action to enforce some of these rules, you're then by extension limiting the compensation that the Supreme Court has decided is entitled to have.
Can Dinkytown athletes recruit athletes?
Nope.
So in terms of getting them onto the collective,
I see.
So that they've got a platform to connect with NIL opportunities. How do you go about securing those athletes, letting them know about this opportunity, and then how do you follow through to make sure that those athletes have actually fulfilled their obligations to those donors?
Okay. I jumped the gun. We're not involved in recruiting on behalf of or in any way a part of the university, but your question was how do we recruit them to join Dinkytown Athletes once they're a student athlete at the University of Minnesota? Yes, our collective by choice is only supporting student athletes at the University of Minnesota. That's our choice, that's our only focus. So once they are committed University of Minnesota student athletes, we do reach out through various ways, connections and social media, as you mentioned, et cetera, and tell them what we're about, ask them to be a part of it. Nothing we do is exclusive. So we're not a professional agency, as you kind of mentioned to lead off. We're not in this as a for-profit endeavor. So it's a pretty easy conversation about, we're here to create NIL opportunities for you and give you the opportunity to earn some compensation, or even just to grow your brand, et cetera. We'll help you do that because we have the university's successes in mind. And we're not, again, we're not going to tie you down or say that if you work with us, you can't work with someone else, et cetera. So that's many times a part of that conversation. We've had really good luck. I mean, we just haven't generally been turned down.
Yeah, we do have a mechanism. There's a software package that it's called BasePath that it really has helped us from about 4 different ways. But what it does essentially is it lays out sort of the contract terms, what a student athlete says, or what the contract says that they need to do to fulfill the contract, and it allows compliance to be able to see it, us to see it, to make sure that the student athlete knows what their responsibilities are. And so that's the way we can ensure that that student athletes are fulfilling their contract terms.
What do you think this is going to look like in 10 years or 5 years? And no one has a crystal ball to say they know for sure, but it's started out in 2021, and now it's 2022, and it's grown. It's probably much different than when you first looked at it. I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts, both of you. What you think, what you know now, what it's going to look like.
You better.
Well,
answer
I
this
think,
one. I don't know.
yeah, we don't have a crystal ball, and we've talked to a lot of people who think they know what this is going to look like in 5 or 10 years, and I don't think anybody knows. But if you were asking us to speculate, and I think this will be a core foundation, think of it like a support program that all Power 5 universities will have. I think the question is, who's running that? How is it being organized, and what are the rules and regulations? That's the part that's I think going to change over time. I mean, there's a case to be made that maybe the universities themselves are this is an arm or an extension of the university. This could also be a arm's length relationship like Gopher Sports Properties or Learfield Entertainment, which is its own company that has an arm's length agreement with the university. It could be something similar to that. There are we have no inside information. There are no hints or winds blowing to say one way or another. But I think that's the part that's untold. But I guess the short answer is I do feel strongly that this, in some capacity, will be a core component for sure.
Gentlemen, I know you're focused on the University of Minnesota, but I want to ask you about an article that appeared in the New York Times just a week or two ago, and it made quite a splash. And it was about a gymnast at LSU named Olivia Dunn. She's got about 6 million followers on TikTok and reportedly makes $2 million a year through NIL. But she also posts a lot of videos and photos of herself in swimsuits and skimpy attire. And that's created some controversy. Do you feel that someone like Olivia Dunn, who's had so much success with NIL, posting the way that she does that put pressure on young female athletes to do the same thing in order to be successful?
Well, I think what's happening there is the number of followers obviously drives part of the value of what someone's social influence is, but there's a bigger story behind how much influence and what are the demographics of that follower base. For us, many of these student athletes have value because of their social influence, not only because of the numbers, but actually because, as Rob mentioned earlier, their followers are young teenagers. If it's a female athlete, many of their followers are young females, which other brands and businesses want to market to. So there's a picture of that. But ultimately, these individuals are kind of running they're independent contractors running their own brand. So there's a choice to be made. Whether or not that influences or pressures I couldn't say.
I think you articulated it perfectly. I mean, that is.
Yeah. I can see that. I mean, frankly, that's the world we live in. I can see that being monetized, and within the whatever social networks rules, the boundaries could be pushed there, and I could see how that's working from a financial aspect. But whether or not it's influencing or pushing others, we haven't had any direct exposure to that, but I'm sure it is to some capacity.
So for both of you, you're doing this because you love University of Minnesota athletics, and that clearly comes out from your passion and what you're saying today. You must have other jobs that you have to do besides just doing Dinkytown Athletes. How do you coordinate all that, and how do you make that all work with your?
Well, I think you should tell the real story, Derek. Tell the story.
Of how we got involved.
Yeah, how we got involved.
Well,
because it is. It's the real story.
Yeah, we right now we don't. We were involved in a business together, co-owners. Rob was there 30 years. I was there 20 years, and we sold the business a little over a year ago. And so our intention was to take a break for a little bit, but. I do a guest spot on Gopher Gridiron Radio podcast, and the gentleman who owns that was a part of a fan group, essentially, of Gopher fans that had created a community online, and because they knew that the University of Minnesota needed a collective. And so these well-meaning fans had kind of researched and decided what needed to be done, but they were all, as you mentioned, young professionals that didn't have the time to lead this. So we were asked if we would lead it in kind of this interim period in our life. And initially, we had questions and we knew how much work was ahead of us, but we agreed to take it on, and we're all in now, and this is what we're doing at this moment.
I mean, it is a full-time job and it is a passion project, but we just want to be at the Rose Bowl. We want to be at Final Fours and know that we played. Maybe it was a little part, maybe it was a big part, but it's a chance to be a part of it. And I mean, we are seeing the whole playing field now. I mean, we didn't know, but as it relates, I mean, he was set on doing it. I didn't know, but he's so much bigger. Like, how could I say no to him?
Can we go to the Rose Bowl with you in the Final Fours?
Absolutely, it's going to be great.
Yeah. Listen, any Gopher fan wants to experience that. It's been a long time. Last question, gentlemen. We're almost out of time. The NIL genie is out of the bottle, and it is not going back. There are some who would argue that NIL is going to ultimately hurt college athletics more than it's going to help. What do you say to that?
I can say one thing right now. When I look at the Big Ten basketball season, which I get so excited, Indiana might have had 2 or 3 players that would have gone to the pros, and they might not have made it. In the pros, they could have been in the G League, but they got enough dollars. We've been told that they stayed around. I think that's a good thing. I think if people are not just chasing like the dream of being a professional when they haven't been groomed, they haven't gotten their education yet, I think NIL gives them that opportunity. It gets them ready, like we said before, be a professional.
I would just real quickly add, with the amount of money in the television contracts that we're all familiar with, I think it's a good thing that the athletes are able to be compensated, or at least on their own, for doing work, to be able to, if it's going to be that popular, which we know it is, for them to be able to benefit from it, I think is a good thing.
Good. Gentlemen, thank you. Time to clap off the show.
Yeah.
Robert, Derek, thank you so much for joining us on Behind the Game today. Billy, Rob, always great to see you. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again next month on Behind the Game.